Our third presentation is from Carolyn Thomas, a professor of American Studies at UC Davis. Her research is on the relationship between technology and health, production and consumption in the U.S., and she's currently working on a number of articles that she's listed on the mechanization of tomato harvesting in the 1960s, the rise in popularity of behavioral vision therapy for children.
Oh my gosh, that's so old.
Yeah, this is what's on your website, you know? Yes.
Yeah.
Her two books, Empty Pleasures, the story of artificial sweetener from Saccharin to Splenda, and The Body Electric, how strange machines built the modern American. So welcome to Carolyn Thomas.
So before you hit play, I don't want to hit play yet. So that's my hybrid identity. I'm the Dean and Vice Provost of Undergraduate Education as my day job now, and that's probably where my website is updated. And then there's this World in American Studies that floats freely where I have an identity too. So now I'm really tempted not to do what I plan to do because Joe was really talking me into doing something about new work, and I agreed to do that. But now what I want to do is play with David and Karen and just talk about what I did before in my hybrid identity as Carolyn de la Pena, and wrote books about personal technology and sort of the everyday quotidian ways that in order to be more of whatever we'd like to be at the moment, technologies offer a corollary promise to what they might seem to be doing, like artificial sweetener as a pharmaceutical product or electric belts as sort of ways of plugging yourself into modernity. But maybe in the Q&A we can play with that. Okay, but what I'm doing today is I'm talking about hybrid learning. And what I'm interested in really is how shifting forms for this thing that we all do, we teach. We get up and we teach, and we know what it is, and we know how to do it. And when you move into a very different realm of technology, and it's attached to this thing called teaching, what happens and why? So, but because this is a hybrid, this is my hybrid 25 minutes or whatever I have, I now am going to give you something really interesting, and that is Steve Luck. Okay, here I go. Did we get it? Steve's talking and no one can hear him.
Do we have sound on? Are you using, which keyboard are you using? The separate one?
The inevitable technology moment.
Topics such as perception, attention,
Cool.
memory, language, and thinking. Cognitive psychology is at the very core of all contemporary psychology, and I think you'll find it to be a very interesting topic. This version of Introduction to Cognitive Psychology is a hybrid course that combines online and face-to-face activities. I created this hybrid version because I was dissatisfied with having 200 students in a huge lecture hall just sitting there listening passively while I lectured at the front of the room. That's just not a good way to learn. Over time, classes at UC Davis and at universities around the country have gotten bigger and bigger, while at the same time tuition has gotten higher and higher. That's just not right. And there's tons of evidence that this kind of teaching doesn't really promote good learning. UC Davis is trying to do something about this by encouraging faculty to use new technologies in teaching that will allow us to improve the quality of undergraduate education. In particular, they're encouraging the development of hybrid courses, which combine online learning with face-to-face learning. The university provided me with a small grant to convert my course from a traditional big lecture class into this kind of hybrid course. They also offered a 10-week workshop that I attended so that I could learn how to design and produce a hybrid course. I spent 2 years putting this hybrid version of Psych 100 together, and I think the new format is a big improvement. Instead of coming to 4 hours of live lecture each week in a lecture hall with 200 students and no opportunity for discussion, you'll watch online videos of the lectures and then meet once a week in groups of 25 students for small group discussions. The small group discussions add a lot to the course, and they're not something I could do with 200 students in the traditional version. Because the lectures are all pre-recorded, I can spend my time in small group discussions rather than in a giant lecture hall. Also, there are a lot of things I can do in an online lecture that I can't do in a lecture hall. For example, when we talk about perception, we'll take a field trip to my kitchen so that we can use real objects like this blender as examples of perception. We'll also spend some time in my kitchen talking about how each hemisphere of the cerebral cortex is like a sheet of pizza dough. Also, the lectures will be divided up into segments of about 5 minutes, which makes it easier for you to pay attention. And you'll get a comprehension question at the end of each of those lecture segments. Research by cognitive psychologists shows that answering questions like these can help you to retain the information you've learned and do better on exams. Most importantly, because I won't be spending my time giving the same live lectures every year, I'll have time to lead small group discussions. I'm hoping that I'll actually get to know many of you, which never happened when I taught lectures to 200 students at a time. I've found that most students like this new format much better than a traditional lecture format. The combination of short lecture videos and frequent quizzing leads students to learn the lecture material much better, leading to significantly higher exam scores and better grades. And the discussion sections make it possible for you to learn things that I could never even hope to teach in a traditional lecture course. I hope you like this course, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the first week of the quarter.
Okay, so like a good hybrid teacher, now what I've managed to do is shorten the amount of time that I have to stand up in front of you and talk. I've used pre-existing, highly visual material, and I presented information to you in a short chunk. That was about 3 minutes. If this were an actual hybrid module, it might be 5 to 7. And maybe I've increased your engagement by shifting to a slightly different format for a few minutes. If this were a hybrid course now, I would have 3 or 4 questions that we would ask to reinforce your learning about key themes. And if I presented all the information to you in the course this way, if we were in sort of a general content class, it is research that shows that most of you would do significantly better on exams. Some of you would do quite a bit better, and some of you would be just about the same. And why is that? Part of it is that there's short modules, there's frequent quizzes, there's the ability for students to rewatch things. But what I think is particularly interesting is that really the thing that kind of stands out about, why this works, if it works, and we can criticize it all you want in the Q&A, but when it works for students, if we're focused on learning, it's because the clarity of what it is we want students to learn when they walk away has been examined. So as of right now, there's quite a bit of work, it's really tiny, but that's okay, on online learning. But the thing about online learning is that what it actually focuses on typically in the scholarship is kind of, 2 questions. And one of those is, what happens when you put a class fully online, right? And the other is, what happens when you give somebody a tool, a clicker, or they use a different learning management system? And a lot of that is really focused on specific questions about either the student and what happens to them, or the institution. Is this funded? Is it too much work for the faculty? Does it have labor concerns that are connected to it? But what I'm actually really interested in is something that is unique to what we do on this campus, and that's the hybrid format. So this is a little graphic that's used for the Provost Hybrid Course Award, and it's explained this way to faculty who are interested in thinking about it. And what's really remarkable is if you see over there on the left the course taught in winter or spring, there is about a year before that course is taught. And I'm interested in what happens during this year, because I'm interested in what happens for many of the faculty who participate in the process. So there's the 10 workshops that happen between January and March. There's the initial course planning where you have support coming from our instructional designers and our educational specialists. And all of this, then, you have a debut for your learning showcase, and there's not been a student involved. So what is that? What are we producing when someone stands up there to do their learning showcase? It's really a question that hasn't been asked in the literature, and the reason why it hasn't been asked is because we do something unique at UC Davis with this hybrid format. So the first thing we produce in hybrid courses is the individual, and I'm interested in what that is. So to step back for a second and talk about why we do the work that we do, for me, this is about working with the team that I collaborate with in Academic Technology Services and the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, and Cheryl Ziermeyer's in the back, and she's one of our instructional designers. And I'm interested at this point in my career at really moving, and part of this is I have to, moving away from the kind of work that took me to archives where I spent a lot of time working out my ideas and then working them into the teaching that I did, and that iterative process. And now I need to find another way to work where I will still have the questions that I like to ask. And so this is both information I'm going to present to you, but also a process for me of working with collaborators. And I'm really pondering, even after hearing those first two talks, the way that how can I incorporate my strength as someone who is trained to look at a lot of different information and find the holes, or a lot of different information and find the wow, and then connect that to data that can be meaningful, because my day job is to help us do a better job of instructing students, right, rather than just saying, aha. So many of the things I'm going to say to you, the question you could ask would be, well, how do we know that any of that is actually true? That's the question I would look to a social science institute to help me think through, as well as with my team. So extemporaneously, moving beyond a few things, research design, just to let you know a little bit about what's gone into this in the background. I attended some hybrid showcases. I went to the workshop series, sat with people who were in it, and kind of looked at the questions that they're asking. I reviewed pre-existing short interviews from all of the participants, and I held a few preliminary long interviews while we're getting IRB for the project. I reviewed the literature on online education. I reviewed my own work and tried to figure out what is it that I know that I can bring to this project, because no technology is new. And I joined a practitioners research team where I meet with the staff who are involved in this, and we talk about what's going on in projects and try to brainstorm research ideas, and I'm learning how to work as a collaborator like that. So what I want to talk about now are the things that I think flip. All right, if the class flips, there's a lot of emphasis that it's about the class, but if I think it's the faculty member that flips, well, what's part of that process? I like that quote that's up there. So that's from one of the participants. You don't get the money to do a provost hybrid course, and you don't get the support in any way if you don't come to the workshops. And the workshops, there are 10 of them, and they are long. They are multi-hour workshops, and you really need to go. So what was fascinating to me at first is that across faculty, and I mean faculty you would not think would want to do this, and I mean faculty who already knew stuff, who could make videos on their own, their reaction was that this was very useful, that this was great. There was this enthusiasm for it. And I've been in the workshops, you know, and our team is great. They're great presenters, but there's not something magical happening, right? There's no ponies or unicorns, and they're not doing something that's incredibly animated in front of the room. So why, right? Why would you say it was so worthwhile? God, who was the last time you went to a meeting and you said, that was so worthwhile, right? I'm really glad. We're all overworked with things like that. So why? I think there's a few things that are happening that are important. One is that from the first time you step into one of these workshops, you are a student. You cannot get access to the material you're expected to see to come into the room unless you go to Canvas, to the site. You cannot communicate with anybody unless you use Piazza. You have to use the tools that are the subject of the course, of the workshop, in order to engage from the very first time. And comments from people from interviews, you know, range around, this made me remember what it was like to be a student. I had an empathy for being a student. It was something that people struggled with, and we watched them struggle. And there was something about that, about coming into the room with a totally different frame, not sitting around a table talking as we're typically used to, but coming in, having to go, Very quickly, when people engage in these workshops, they're given models. They're told to look at other people's examples, and these are all some snapshots of some of our hybrid courses. And they're put in an atmosphere where they question the lecture format. So what they're doing as they're kind of going through this, and I've been pondering it, you know, because a lot of what we try to do across our units that support teaching is to really think, how can we help people look at what they're doing and sort of make some tweaks to that system? So right from the beginning, there's an assumption when you're in this room that you're here because the lecture format is not achieving the thing that you'd like it to achieve. So one of the participants put it this way. He said, you know, when I came in, what I thought I was going to do was take my PowerPoints, because they're really great, and take my lectures to my PowerPoints, and we were just going to put that up and sort of automate it. Students would watch that, and then they'd come into the room, and we'd have meaningful conversations. Well, pretty quickly, people look at best and worst case studies, and as you're sitting there as a student in the room and looking at what it's like to watch a PowerPoint over a 50-minute period, it becomes actually kind of embeddedly clear to you that this is not the experience that you might wish for. Another quote from a participant. It really made me think about how information is presented to students. It's really not engaging to watch someone talk for an hour, even a super dynamic person. I had to learn to parse information into segments that are digestible. It forced me to watch for other things and to look at what was really going on. So, here it's not about coming into a room and critiquing each other's teaching. I think that's really important. It's about coming into a room, there's a technological frame, you're shown these modules, and you're shown this is a format, and then look what it looks like when you're up there and you're just talking. And people have this opportunity, and let's be clear, these are all people who want to be there, right? So we have a skewed group to begin with. But there's a way in that space that people seem in their interviews to kind of get a little giddy, honestly, about critiquing the lecture format they've been participating in, often for 10 or 15 years. And there's some kind of release in that. It's very difficult to have an open space for any kind of critical conversation about one's teaching, and we could go into that, but it's very sort of sensitive, and in a way it's performance art. Right? And nobody likes to be told their performance is lacking. Taking that frame away seems to invite a community that forms around being critical of something you might have been defensive about the day before. So asked repeatedly in this group, this is sort of the third thing I think is important, is the question, what would you do? Right? So every session is about what do you think the goal was for this particular module that we're looking at, right? This 5-minute clip from the anthropology class, what was it sort of centered on? What was the primary thing that the instructor wanted to happen? And to kind of connect to this idea of time, right? There's a way that we have in the space of the 10-week quarter, and the idea that a 10-week quarter has a midterm and a final, and the idea that in good teaching you would have some activities in between a midterm and a final, that the primary measure of what should be occurring becomes kind of locked into that 10 weeks, right, around a kind of sense of coverage. What can we get done in those 10 weeks? And taking that apart and breaking it down to these 5 to 7 minute increments seems to have this effect on some faculty where they're asking in a way, and I don't want to say it's for the first time, but this is really about patterns and habits and what kinds of technologies disrupt those patterns and habits. But for several people that I talked to, there was a sense like this. This was someone in the last round. When she was speaking with the designers who were helping her think through a module, and she was thinking, okay, well, these modules lead to this half of the course, she said, you mean in this part of the course, all I have to do is think about what learning outcomes I want? I just have to think about what I want the students to learn? Because I hate those 2 assignments that I've been given. I don't even like them. I never liked them. You mean I could just do this one over here? Because if my idea is that the students should connect these 2 primary concepts, then really I can do that and not do those things. And what intrigues me about this is that I never experienced in my department, probably most departments, teaching is a pretty free space where you're not particularly policed. In fact, some people would say, not at all what happens. Even in your evaluations, maybe don't at all actually matter. And it's fascinating to see the kinds of rigid systems that are created, because if those weren't in place, there wouldn't be something about putting people in a room and showing them this that would make them say, you mean I can do whatever I want? I could decide what I think matters? And maybe for that we should think about the way we were taught and the inheritances we have from that, and allegiances to material and a sense of coverage, and where that comes from. But it's certainly something that happens in this process that is worth looking at. Playing with tools, the second element, and I have 3. So I just want to show you this as it kind of goes by. You can't read this, but you can get this from me if you'd like to have it. You can also get this from anybody in our Center for Teaching and Learning. Everybody who comes into the workshop gets this list of tools. There's 3 pages here. And these are all just broken down into different categories. You can see them up there. And most of the workshops highlight several of these tools. all of the people that I've interviewed talk about how the incredible knowledge of one particular, was our only instructional designer until Cheryl arrived, Dan Cummins, that his ability to know all these tools and know what they do and talk to you about, here's the thing I was thinking, and he can say, well, have you tried this, and pull it out, and suddenly you're playing with it, that is remarkable, and it's one of the reasons that people really show up week after week. So just to talk sort of from my own experience what this is like is, here's some of the tools just overlaid on that. The week that I went to the workshop, I did something that was off the map, and I looked at Genius. And so all I did was, we were in this room, and there's 15 people, and quietly I spent 20 minutes looking at Genius and playing with this tool. And my assignment was to think about one thing that I would be teaching and how this tool could help me do that. So Genius is an annotation tool. It allows you to put text. There's text that are in there, but you can also add text. And then students can, highlight that text and make connections to other things that are out there. They can then say, what do these things mean? And so I was thinking, what about the Food and Drug Act? What about, looking at like the early document from that? This is something in a lecture that would show up on a slide, and I would show it as it went by, and it might be a keyword that would be on a test. But once I looked at this tool, I thought, wow, students could actually figure out where there's other things that relate to this. I could give them some challenges in groups, and they could do this. And that process for me completely changed. Now I had something that was going to take, that was like 5 minutes, and now that was going to take maybe 2 class sessions, right? Maybe a couple modules, and then coming together in a discussion. So there's a way that as you start to look at these tools, your sense of time and space just expands and changes, right? You start to play with things. And in playing with things, you start to think, well, maybe we don't need to do all that other stuff. Maybe we could just do this. Or you start to think, I am never going to do that because that is so hard, and I never could get anybody to do it. But the playing with the tools is significant. And just to show you, if I can pull one up, do I have a tool here? Do I have my page? I shut down my thing. Don't worry, while you're picking up Thinglink, I can talk about it for a second. So this is another tool that comes up from the workshops, and I wanted you to take a look at it. Perfect. So, do any of you know Thinglink? Do you know how it works? So this might be interesting to some of you who work on images. So coming down here. So Thinglink is basically a tool that lets you take an image and then pretty easily locate hotspots in the image and connect to other things. So you can see here, we can come and we can put a little piece of information here and here and over here and over here. And you probably know there are things to do with maps like this and things to do here. But what these do is it takes you from kind of a flat experience of a one-dimensional object to looking at all the possibilities of connecting it to other things. And as one of the developers said in an interview, the key thing that seems to happen is that participants go from thinking that they're creating knowledge to thinking that they're curating knowledge, and that curation is actually the act of learning facilitation. Now, again, this is a self-selected group, but there are many of us who are really interested in curation. And the ways that we are or are not rewarded for teaching make it difficult to consider curation as a primary act that you're doing. It is what we do when we read books and we stand up in front of people with images. We're curating because we read all that stuff and we're sharing it. But instead, being able to make the act of curation actually the act of classroom time or learning time is a shift that for many people is quite important. Another example of this would be in a class discussion, somebody learned how to use an iPhone app that allows you to pose a question to your class and then have people put in their phones, right, to say, what's your answer within some categories and a little bit of text, and then get together in a discussion with each other and then ask them, now put the answer in again. And you watch as that answer changes and is shaped by discussion, and you can put that up for everybody to see in the class, the movement of ideas through engagement with other points of view. So as people are in these classes, it's not that every week someone sees a tool and they think, oh, this is going to change my life. It's the repeated exposure before you have a class concept to tools where you're asked, think about one thing you do in one class and play around with a tool. What would you do different? That over that repeated period of time seems to make people excited in a way. Now, whether that creates good learning outcomes or whether we support that as an institution, those are all different questions. But the excitement should not be ignored, and the fact that teaching is not a place that generates that kind of deep thought and excitement should be thought about. So the last thing, where did my PowerPoint go? There it is. Okay. Is really a question about the self. So I think of this figure over here, which is almost always on hybrid learning modules, as small Steve, right? That's small Steve. Steve got small. As opposed to the sage on the stage in the center of the room. And so, some questions I wanted to end with are, who is small Steve, right? What happens to Steve in going through this process? Are there things that might be relevant even if we don't care about teaching? Are there things as a university community where we have ideas and we come up with new concepts and we want to be creative that might be important to look at in that small Steve? And here's some ideas I wanted to share. What if our ability to connect knowledge we have to new knowledge improves? So one thing that's interesting is in research that's on teaching assistants, it's very clear that when a graduate student TAs in a class that is sort of baseline knowledge in their field, and this is true if you teach it too, and you're exposed to kind of the fundamental principles, whatever it is, you write a better dissertation. Not only are you more likely to finish, but you're also more likely to do work that in whatever way is valued in your field, right? And so there's some relationship between having a very close connection to old ideas while you're coming up with new ideas that seems like it might be important. And if some of you can relate to this in the room, I find it fascinating that when I need to give a talk on a book that I have written, I have to go back and read it. And it's almost like, who is that? Who did that? And that disturbs me because then I think, what if those ideas that I had aren't with me anymore and I'm just running to the next new thing? And sometimes I think I shouldn't buy one more book. I should be forced to reread every book that I have. And maybe I should go back to my qualifying exams and reread them. And so, right, this is a big issue. But one thing that somebody told me in an interview that really stuck with me was he said, there was this part of my class that I didn't really like when I had to teach it. It's sort of the history of the field part. And I had this lecture, and the lecture, I got through it, but I didn't really like it. And there's actually some stuff in there I think was kind of crap, but everybody has to cover it, so I did it. And then this person created a module from it. And creating the module, okay, that's 5 to 7 minutes. And now you have to figure out, you can't fit the whole history anymore. You can fit 5 to 7 minutes. And in picking out the part of the history of the field that for this person was most important and going back to that material and then doing it the way that for him was important, he says that in doing that, that history somehow stuck in his mind. And later, as he was doing his own research, a question emerged for him where he realized, oh, something I've rejected is actually true. And I'm going to go back to that thing. And he put in a grant proposal and got funding for it. Now, this is really specific to someone else's case, but I just want to suggest that when we teach things, there's a part of it that we love that resonated with us, or we wouldn't have probably taught that lecture. But what if it's a kernel? What if it's smaller than an hour and 20 minutes, which is the time the lecture room is available for us that we have to cover, that we're told to be in there because the student credit hours are related to X? What if it's smaller than that? And what if in allowing knowledge to be smaller than that and coming around iteratively with students, we would retain a kind of intimacy with elements of past knowledge that would be helpful for us as well. The separation of teaching and research is a really weird thing. You really think about it. But I think it would It could impact that. 2, what if we expand free and creative space in our work lives? So some people think 20%, right? It's sort of a Google principle. 20% of what you do should be just a creative activity, and you don't know if it's going to work at all. You're just doing it. Okay, nobody has time for 20% of what they're doing to be truly creative activity. But there's a phrase that came out of the interviews with one of the participants who said, you know, the thing is, when I did all of this, what happened was I went to the discussion, which is in these small groups now, and it was like a blank sheet of paper. It was an unusual feeling. I don't remember having that feeling before, because I knew from the quizzes and I knew from the modules that the students had kind of gotten the baseline concepts. So I could have come to discussion and gone over the baseline and said, are you confused? But I didn't really need to do that, I didn't think, in the same way, because they could watch it as many times as they wanted to, and my office hours are always full. That's where people seem to want to ask me questions now. So what was going to happen, and what do you do an hour a week with students who have some base understanding of something you cared about? I don't know. But it might be interesting what would happen. And what some people have done in this work is not related at all to the content of the course, which we should look at. You know, some people decide, I want students to know how to read something. So, you know, every week what we're going to do is get together and we're going to talk about, how do you read? How do you really read? And then how can we have a real argument by week 10 about a scholarly journal? You're free from things you've constructed in your head that might be suggesting you're not. And this is just some people's evidence. There can be totally different stories. And the last thing, oh, and I like this quote from someone, so I do want to read it. And it is, you can do whatever the hell you want in teaching. There's no reward, really. So you might as well be seen as wacko by others or ignored when they don't agree with you, but you can. You can do something. So it's a little awkward as the dean of undergraduate education to say you can do whatever the hell you want in teaching. But what I'm trying to point out here is, if you don't have the entire burden, that what you're saying every time you come into the room is students are achieving learning from that, but that what you're doing is allowing learning to happen through curation in some mode, that there can be a free space next to it. And the last thing is, you know, so what if we get small? What if we all got small? There is a burden of presenting information to students when they can Google it on themselves on their laptop in the room. There is certainly a burden of doing that in a room with 200, 100, 150 people. Is it possible, and we'd have to resource things differently, but that we can become people, or at least appreciated or try to be people who guide students through knowledge that exists, showing them where the gaps are and where the questions are. And just might this make us, and here, you know, think about what happens when you're in front of that room doing that performance art on a regular basis. Could it make us kinder or more humble or more open to collaboration in other forms? Could we be better community members, maybe, to each other with these lifetime employments, privileges that we have? And the last part of this is, it seems like there would be something lost. You know, one of the things that people talk about when they come into the program that's interesting is that some faculty are motivated by a loss of intimacy. They really feel like, you know, maybe they went to a liberal arts school, or that they started teaching here and it was different, like that they want to connect to their students. And there's a point when you cannot fool yourself. You know you are not getting past row 3. And you're a great teacher, and you've done the things that you can do, and you really can't get further than that. So I just kind of want to suggest that in that part, whatever that heart work is to what we do, I've been standing up here talking to you, but I can guarantee you, if you watched a few more modules of Steve, I could talk to you all I wanted, and Steve would be the one you would start having warm and fuzzy feelings about. There is a kind of intimacy that comes from watching someone on screen, and it's part of contemporary culture. And especially for our students, for whom you probably noticed, if you know you have kids who, YouTube is where fame lies, right? TV shows are fine and movies are fine, but YouTube, that easy intimacy of a short piece where you're somehow asked to play along, inside jokes or whatever that is a space that learning's occurring. And according to Steve, when he comes in after they watch his modules and he opens a dialogue with students on the first day of discussion, they're like, oh my gosh. And that's not something he actually experienced when he ran into them at Safeway after teaching them in front of the room. So it's possible prestige traffics in different ways as well. So thank you.